Alright, hi everyone. So this is part 3 of learning how to walk bass lines in jazz for bass players and piano players. Again, if you haven't checked out the previous 2 videos before this one, I highly suggest you do that because I talk about beginning steps and beginning tools that you can use to slowly go from just playing whole notes to playing half notes. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the next step after you've become very, very comfortable with just walking half-note bass lines. So the next step is probably, disclaimer, the most awkward step in this. And what it is it involves walking 2 quarter notes followed by a half note. So in general, the rhythm of your bass lines is going to sound something like this. That kind of thing. So really what you can do with this is you can take the exact same concepts from when you practiced half note walking bass lines, but just change the rhythm of it a little bit to just being 2 quarter notes followed by a half note. So I'll show you a couple examples of what that would look like. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's interesting, what I mostly gravitated towards just using this rhythm is mostly 1s and 5s, if you noticed that. So now I'm going to try to use that same rhythmic format, just 2 quarter notes followed by a half note, but now I'm going to try to include more approaching from a half step and above and below for the roots of chords and also other chord tones. So let's see how that goes. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I really mean it when I say this step is the most awkward because it's kind of a pairing of, I don't know what it is, just 2 quarter notes with a half note when you're trying to get to a goal of walking 4 full quarter notes can be kind of awkward in that sense. So one additional tool that I'd like to talk about a bit is the use of, if you've watched some of the videos on this Facebook page about extra note rules, or in other words, adding in certain degrees of chromaticism to make chord tones land on the beat. This is especially just as useful for bass players or people who are walking bass lines as it is for instrumentalists. So just to reiterate, if we take the chord change F dominant 7, that comes from the F dominant 7th scale. Now, in terms of descending bass lines, or going from a higher note to a lower note, or higher pitch to lower pitch, I should say, we can use extra notes in order to make our resolution on chord tones more easily accessible. So, for example, if I was trying to start here on this F, and I had the goal of walking over F7 with making chord tones land on the beat, if I do something like this, that does lead nicely into the B flat 7, which is true, but if I want to use extra note rules, I can say something like this: a 1, 2, 3, 4. So in other words, I used that half step in between tonic and 7 to make the chord tone, that flat 7, land on a strong beat. And if what I'm talking about now is confusing to you, then on this channel, or page, excuse me, look up where I talk about extra note rules for improvisation, and it's the exact same thing. So I can use extra note rules within the scope of bass lines, in addition to all the other tools I talked about in the previous two videos, with roots and fifths and thirds, and approaching from the half step above and below. So right now I'm going to still use this framework of 2 quarter notes followed by a half note, but I'm going to try to throw in just a little bit of extra note rules so that you can see what I'm talking about, just for a visual and oral example. So here we go. Let's see if I can incorporate all that. A 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it's interesting at this step, I'm almost naturally gravitating towards 4 full quarter notes, and at this step it's going to be tempting to do that, but it's necessary to practice this step. So I'll try it again, and I'll try to avoid walking 4 quarter notes here. A 1, 2, 3, 4. Thing. And really, this whole notion of what notes to pick within the scope of a bass line can, one of the issues with it is that it can be explained in a number of different ways. And what I mean by that, let's say I start a bass line like this. Right? I can explain that in terms of, oh, I repeated the root twice, then went to a chord tone, or I could say I repeated the root twice, and then I approached the next root, or targeted it from a half step below, and then I targeted another chord tone from F7 from a half step below. You know, that's one way of explaining it. Or I could say it's valid because I'm essentially outlining a diminished chord that leads me back to the 1. And I talk about that in previous videos too. So what I'm saying here is, because there are so many different ways to explain why a certain part of a bass line is valid, because there are multiple ways to explain it, that's why it's difficult to wrap your head around it sometimes, because there's not one like standard answer. But that's the beauty of it, because there's so many ways that you can, again, move from one place to another. So I think I'm going to end it here for this video. That's just another concept to practice, is this notion of extra note rules can help us when we're walking bass lines, because it's another tool to allow us to have strong resolutions on chord tones, but also gives us more options for when we walk. So I'm going to continue with this series with the next video about more tools that you can use. So stay tuned for that, and thanks.